Well, here we are in the first Sunday in the season of Lent, beginning a new series. It's called Listen for Grace. If you saw the video introduction to this series that I did, then you know the story of the group of folks who showed up at the office of a telegraph company to apply for the position of telegraph operator back in the day of the telegraph. They sat in the outer waiting room, waiting to be called in. They were given the instruction to wait, and when they were called in, that they were to go back through a door into the inner office to be interviewed. After only a minute or two, one of the candidates got up and walked back into the inner office. And in just a few minutes, out came the candidate with the manager announcing that he had gotten the job. Well, the other candidates were furious. They thought surely he wouldn't get the job. He had the gall to go back there without being called. And now he gets the job when we waited and did what we were told, and he gets the job? That's not fair. And the manager explained that the whole time they were waiting, and the noise of the office in the background was clicking out the message on the telegraph key. If you can understand this message, come through the door, the job is yours. So with all the noise going on, with all the distractions, that one candidate could focus in on the most important message. It's my prayer for you and for me that we will learn how to listen for grace. That we will be able to discern with all the noise and all the busyness, that we can take the time to listen and we can look around and we can be aware of God's grace everywhere. Today, we're talking about grace as presence, God's presence. We heard the words from the third chapter of Genesis. We heard the story told by Nancy a moment ago. Those first few chapters of the book of Genesis contain stories that are often called etiological stories. That is, they're stories that explain why things are the way they are. But why is the world the way it is? Why are things the way they are? Why are we the way we are? Why do we respond the way we do? Why do we rebel? Why do we try to go our own way? Why are things the way they are? Why is it this way? Those are the questions. Now, science, of course, can answer many of those questions, but Genesis is not a science book. Rather, Genesis is, among the other scriptures, a book that answers those three main questions that we always bring to the study of the Bible. Who are we? Who is God? And what is the relationship between God and us? Who is God? Who are we? What is the nature of that relationship? Those are the questions. And so here we have, in the first chapter of Genesis, we have God creating everything, the creatures that swim in the sea and the creatures that crawl around on the earth. And once they're all created, then on the last day of creation, before God rests on the seventh day, God creates human beings, man and a woman, male and female. He created them in God's own image. God created them, it says. And that's the first chapter. The second chapter of Genesis has another creation story, and in this one, God creates everything, and on the last day, God creates the man, and then the man is lonely. And God says it's not good for the man to be alone. And so God creates a companion, a woman. And the two, it says, become one flesh. And God gives them this garden. And they have free reign of the garden, and they can eat of all the fruit of the garden, except for the fruit on that one tree in the center of the garden. And God says, don't eat that or you will die. So the second chapter of Genesis ends with this beautiful picture. A garden with everything they need. There's a kind of innocence. There's a childlike innocence about Adam and Eve. And they're naked, and they don't care. They're not concerned about that. They don't notice it. They're vulnerable, but they don't even notice their vulnerability. And they have this harmonious relationship with one another and with God and with the garden, all of creation. That's how the second chapter ends. And then in the third chapter comes the snake. And you can hiss if you want to. So in comes the snake. That's enough. How's that, the cutoff? Whatever you do. So in comes the snake. And the snake is the most subtle, the King James Version says. The most crafty, the New Revised Standard Version says. The most intelligent, the Common English Bible Version says, that we heard a moment ago, of all of the wild creatures God created. Now there's a play on words here, because we've just learned that the man and the woman are naked, and that's fine, and they're not at all self-conscious or ashamed about that at all. They're naked. And then in the next few verses, we found out that this snake is crafty, is subtle, is intelligent. Now, the word for naked it's a play on words here. It's very similar to the word for crafty. Almost the same in Hebrew. And that play on words is not captured in the English translations. One commentator said, we should translate that differently because those words are really the same, or they rhyme, or they're very close. And so we should say that the man and the woman were nude and the snake was shrewd, which kind of works. Because the Hebrew connects the nakedness, the innocence, the lack of that weight of vulnerability, the lack of fear, the lack of shame, and it connects then the craftiness of the snake, and that is of temptation. And those things are joined together in the Hebrew language. And so the snake says, did God really tell you, he says this to the woman, that you can't eat any fruit in all of the garden? And she said, no, God said we can eat any fruit of all the trees in the garden except for one, the one that's in the middle of the garden, and that one we cannot eat of that fruit. We can't even touch it, she said, or we'll die. Now that's interesting that Eve decides to add to what God said, because God only said you can't eat of the fruit. He didn't say anything about touching the fruit or touching the tree. What's she doing there? She's putting some psychological distance between that temptation, that forbidden fruit, and herself. Just putting a little distance, not even going to touch it. It's like when Bluebell ice cream is calling your name from the freezer, and you don't even go in our case, the laundry room where that freezer is. I don't even go in there, and if I do, I don't open the freezer door, because that's one more step closer to it, and then I know that I'll take out the carton, and then the lid will come off, and then the spoon, and then I won't stop until I hit cardboard. And so she's putting some psychological distance there. We can't even touch it, she says. And the snake says, oh, you're not going to die. The truth is, the snake says, that God is only saying that because God knows when you eat of the fruit of that tree, then you will be like God. You'll know everything. You'll know the difference between good and evil, like God does. Well, the fruit looks so good and so tempting. Forbidden fruit is the sweetest, they say. You know how that works. Mark Twain said that God made a mistake in not forbidding the eating of the snake, because he said otherwise Adam would have eaten the snake and everything would have been different. But she takes the fruit, she eats it, she gives some to her husband, he eats it, and then suddenly it says their eyes are opened and they are ashamed, they are vulnerable, and they understand and know their vulnerability, and so they hide, and then things begin to fall apart, and they, because of this turning away from God, because of this rebellion, and because of going their own way, then they end up hiding, and they end up making clothes out of fig leaves to cover their sense of shame and their vulnerability. How many of you have ever picked figs? Raise your hand. So only a few of you know that you don't make underwear out of fig leaves. Fig leaves are scratchy. I remember as a kid, we would go to Miss Viva Gray's house and we would pick figs, and we always wore long sleeves, even if it was hot outside, because fig leaves are itchy and scratchy, and you just don't. And so, how crazy is this? How ridiculous is this? And that's the point. The point is, when we go our own way, when we try to be like God, it's just a disaster. And it ends up hurting. And it's uncomfortable. So Adam and Eve are hiding. And then God comes walking in the garden in the cool of the day. It's a beautiful image. It's this human-like image of God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. It's a very intimate image. It's like things were. You get the sense that it's been like that. The harmony between the man and the woman, and with creation and with God, that kind of intimacy, and God's walking in the garden. But something's wrong because they're missing. And so he asks the question that God asks over and over again throughout the ages. Where are you? He asks. Where are you? And finally they admit that they're hiding. They're hiding because they were ashamed, because they saw that they were naked. They're vulnerable, and they're ashamed, and they're fearful. And God's response is, who told you that? Did you eat of the fruit that I told you not to eat? And they then begin to do what is an age-old thing to do. Shift responsibility. Shift blame. Adam goes first. Adam says, well, that woman that you gave me made me eat the fruit. Now who's he blaming? The woman? No, he's blaming God. God, this is your fault. This is your responsibility. You gave me the woman. She made me eat the fruit. And then the woman says, yes, but it was that snake. The snake tricked me, and I ate the fruit. And then everything just unravels from there. Life is going to be difficult. It's going to be hard. There's this brokenness all of a sudden. It seems that everything is out of kilter. But you notice part of that brokenness is this age-old human habit of shifting responsibility to someone else. Really had that on my mind this week. I think about M. Scott Peck's book, The People of the Lie. M. Scott Peck was an Army psychiatrist, and he was given the very difficult job of trying to figure out how in the world the horrific My Lai massacre occurred in Vietnam, where women and children were killed. How could that happen? And as he began to interview people, as he began to look into it, he heard over and over again the same phrase that was heard over and over again at the Nuremberg trials. I was just following orders. Somebody else's responsibility. And so in this book, People of the Lie, he not only talks about group evil, because it is an analysis of human evil. That's what the book is. But he talks about individual evil. And he defines it finally as coming down to not taking responsibility. So I've been thinking about that a lot this week. In the wake of yet another school shooting, can you believe I'm saying to you yet another tragedy? I can't get out of my mind the picture of the mother with the ashes of Ash Wednesday on her forehead, weeping, terrified. One of the things that we are hearing again in the wake of this yet another tragedy is that message, our thoughts and prayers are with them. Now, if you've been listening this week, you know that that is a phrase that is really wearing thin. Because thoughts and prayers are not enough. There is this notion that everyone is shifting responsibility and no one's taking responsibility, and so we can just solve it by saying our thoughts and prayers are with them. That's not enough. It's not enough. The writer of the book of James makes that clear when he says, if you have a brother or a sister who is in need, and you say to that brother or sister, go, be at peace, be well fed and warmed, then what good is it? James asks. He says, faith without works is dead. Thoughts and prayers without taking responsible action doesn't amount to anything. No wonder our young people are rising up and saying, enough is enough. So there is this issue of responsibility there, and God is asking, in the midst of this, where are you? Where are you? In the very next chapter of the book of Genesis, we see this again. It's the first murder that takes place in the Bible. When Cain murders his brother Abel, and God comes looking for Abel. Again, God is our searching God, that none should be lost, asking the question of where he is. And Cain's answer is, am I my brother's keeper? And the answer to that resounds throughout Scripture and the prophets and Jesus and in James and everywhere else is, yes, you are your brother's and your sister's keeper. It's about responsibility. And so part of the brokenness that we experience in this story is that brokenness that issues in wanting to put off the responsibility to someone else. And sometimes it's even putting it off on God, like Adam really did. God, this is your business. You take care of it. So we're challenged. And here's the good news that I want us to hear today, and here's the challenge that I want us to hear, and that is when Adam and Eve leave the garden, they leave for a reason that may not be apparent. First of all, before they leave, God expresses in a very gracious way the covering love of God, the grace of God, when he gives them clothes. He looks at this bedraggled, pitiful couple with wilted fig leaves on, and he gives them animal skins to clothe themselves with. And whenever we see that in the Bible, a new set of clothes, that's an image of the grace of God. The prodigal son, when the prodigal son returns home, the father gives him a new robe, new shoes, ring for his finger. It's that kind of image that we have here. God gives them new clothes, and then God closes the gate to the garden not because they're being punished, but if you listen to the words, it's because there's another tree in the garden, and that's the tree of life, and if they eat that fruit, then they'll live forever. And the problem is they'll live forever in this new condition that they have, in this new reality, and that's not so good. And here's the other thing. God doesn't stay in the garden, but God goes with them. And the whole Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, is this movement from paradise, and that's the Persian word for garden, to paradise. And the whole movement is God constantly saying to everyone, where are you? Where are you? I want to be in relationship with you. Where are you? Calling us into relationship. And God comes to us in Jesus, the Word made flesh, saying, where are you? And calling us to be in that relationship. And then there is that challenge that comes through as well. Where are you? When a brother or sister is in need, where are you? When there is an issue that must be addressed, where are you? And that question is asked over and over again. See, the good news of God's grace is God is ever present with us in a way that even in tragedy, God is there. And God also asks, where are you? Where are we? It's my prayer for you and for me in this season of Lent that our ears will be tuned to listen for grace and to hear God asking that question directly to each one of us, where are you? Amen.